not come riding over the hill. Ukraine is going down. There is nobody to rescue them. There is nobody to save them except the Russians. And it's time they turn their fate and their future over to Russia by bringing it into this conflict on terms acceptable to Russia. And if one takes a look at the terms that Russia was putting forward back in 2022, they were extraordinarily fair, extraordinarily fair. And I would imagine that Russia will have fair terms now, too. I mean, they're not going to give up the territories that they've absorbed. That won't happen. But if Ukraine acts promptly to bring it into this conflict, Ukraine may not lose other territories. I don't know if it's too late for Odessa. When you turn Odessa into a platform to attack Crimea, to threaten the Black Sea Fleet, as Ukraine has done, I think Russia is well within its rights to say that Odessa and the Black Sea coast can never again be trusted to a sovereign Ukraine, that Russia's national security dictates that it controls that coastline, that city. Again, only Russia gets to make that decision, but I think that Russia may have decided that one of the terms for ending this war is that Ukraine loses sovereignty over Odessa and the Black Sea, and that this may become part of Novaya Russia. But again, only Russia can make that case. But whether or not they lose Kharkov, whether or not they lose Dnipropetrovsk, there might be a chance for Ukraine to retain, territory. But they have to stop this war now. And I don't know if they're ready to do that yet.
We've heard some rumors about Zelensky negotiating with Russians behind the scene. In your opinion, was that real? It was all made up? How did you find it?
Well, it's interesting. First of all, under what authority would Zelensky be negotiating? Because no negotiation, a negotiation void of authority isn't a negotiation. It's just words. It's a conversation. It's nothing. Zelensky, I think you're referring to a article published by Seymour Hersh in his Substack. For Zelensky to have a conversation with Gerasimov, that's who the article said he was talking to, that talked about the terms, the freezing of the conflict, etc. He lacks any constitutional authority to engage in that. That is the purview of the presidency, not the military. So right off the bat, from a Ukrainian perspective, it's an absurdity in the extreme that Zelensky would be holding that. But now what makes it even more ludicrous is the Russian perspective. Gerasimov has no authority whatsoever to talk to Zelensky in that manner. None. And moreover, he definitely can't, agree to conditions where Russia would accept a border defined by the current military deployments, thereby ceding to Ukraine in a post-conflict reality the right bank of Kherson. That's Russia. That's constitutionally part of Russia. Gerasimov can't negotiate that away. He can't negotiate away the territory in Zaporizhia that Ukraine currently occupies. He can't negotiate away the territory in Donetsk that Ukraine currently occupies. That is Mother Russia, constitutionally. So Gerasimov should be arrested and shot as a traitor if he's having that kind of conversation, because he's not allowed to have it. More importantly, even the president of Ukraine can't make that determination, because you can't negotiate away Russia. Constitutionally impossible. The Duma, the Senate, would have to agree to this, but that can only happen if there was a Russian defeat, where Russia, desperate for survival, agrees to do things that necessitate their survival. But Russia has said that it will never do that. You know what Russia would do before they would agree to that? They'd go to nuclear war. That's their nuclear doctrine. So it's just, I respect Cy Hersh tremendously. He's a good friend of mine. I've known him for 25 years. But in this case, he just has bad sources. Bad sources. I mean, Cy should have called someone like me and bounced it off of me, or some other Russian expert who had told them this is ludicrous. It's impossible to happen. Literally impossible to happen. It can't happen. So the source isn't just wrong. You have to question the motives of the source, and I think the motives of the source are clear: to sow seeds of doubt in the minds of the Ukrainians and in the Russian people, again, we're playing this stupid psychological operation where we somehow believe that the Russian people can be lured away from Vladimir Putin. I don't know what part of 80% approval rating in the midst of a war that has cost Russia tens of thousands of lives and billions of rubles in national treasury. I mean, if that cost hasn't pried the Russian people away from Putin, nothing will. They are with him till the end. And so little stupid, psychological operations like getting a Pulitzer Prize winning writer to publish nonsense, because it is nonsense. But because of the prestige and the stature of Seymour Hersh, there might be some people who say, well, it has to be true. Well, it's not true, not even real close to being the truth. But that's the only thing I can think of, is that his source was using Cy Hersh for a psychological operation, because it's so far removed from reality as to be absurd, literally absurd. There's not any aspect of that article that rings true to a true expert of Russia or anybody who is familiar with just the reality of it. Russia has won this war. Why would Russia seek to freeze this operation? Why would Russia do anything that is less than demanding the unconditional surrender of Ukraine and the return of all Russian territory to Russia? Russia's not going to agree to a freeze, to a line that gives away Russian territory. Russia isn't going to do something that could only be achieved if it had lost this conflict. Russia has won this conflict decisively. It's over. It's all over, but the screaming, the shouting, and the dying. But that's it. So no, the idea that Zaluzhny and Gerasimov are holding talks is an absurdity in the extreme.
The conflict between Zelensky and Zaluzhny is real. Zelensky was asking for some sort of guarantees in case of having a presidential election in Ukraine. He wanted guarantees that Zaluzhny would not be part of this election, would not participate as a candidate for the presidential election. What's the reason behind this conflict between Zelensky and Zaluzhny? Is that all coming from the outside? Is that something inside their administration?
Look, there's been a divide within Ukraine from the very beginning of this conflict. Zelensky is an actor playing a role. Zaluzhny is a general commanding troops. One is predicated on fantasy, fiction. The other one's predicated on reality. But the reality of the military role can't take hold without the fiction of Zelensky. Two aspects of it. One, if you're going to call Ukraine a democracy worth defending, as the United States and Europe have done so, then you have to sustain the illusion of democracy, the illusion of civilian control of the military. And that's Zelensky's role. And so he does that. Now, the other thing, though, is this illusion has to be useful to the military. It's Zelensky who has been picked as the face of Ukraine. He was the man of the year last year. Why? Because he's the guy, the new Winston Churchill, the modern day embodiment of all that's the West is supposed to stand for: freedom, democracy, defense against this autocratic dictator who's trying to take over the world. And that he became a symbol through which the West poured money, resources, material, political support. Zelensky was that channel. And that's how he was useful to the military, because the military wasn't going to get the tanks, the armored vehicles, and everything without Zelensky. They weren't going to get the money without Zelensky. The military wasn't going to get the tanks, the armored fighting vehicles, the ammunition that it needed because of Zaluzhny. They needed Zelensky to do that. And so Zelensky had a political purpose, and Zaluzhny's military purpose was to take the resources and achieve some sort of result on the battlefield. But Zelensky knew from the start that this was an unwinnable fight. I mean, but he also knew that his purpose was to be seen as trying as opposed to actually doing. That the job was to appear that to create a military problem for Russia that was unsolvable. So Ukraine was never going to defeat Russia. But if Ukraine could create the perception that Russia would never be able to defeat Ukraine, that this was going to become a perpetual war, then you generate political problems inside Russia, which has always been the goal. It's not about Ukraine defeating Russia militarily. It's about Ukraine creating the perception of Russian weakness. And that Russian weakness, therefore, would be used to bring a divide between the Russian people and Vladimir Putin. It's failed. And as a result, the charade is over. Ukraine was never going to win the counteroffensive. They were never going to drive the 90 miles they needed to go to capture Melitopol, to sever the land bridge, to retake Crimea, to roll the Russians up in Donetsk and Lugansk. That was never going to happen. What they wanted to do was create a situation where the Russians were forced to retreat a little bit, maybe mobilize more, divert resources into a forever conflict that became a political liability. But it backfired. The fact is, the defeat of the Ukrainian army, void of any political dividends inside Russia, means that Ukraine has now been defeated strategically. And now the West is questioning the value of continuing to fund this conflict. And so Zelensky's role has been diminished. That's why he's not Man of the Year this year. Taylor Swift is. It speaks volumes. And so now if you're Zelensky, you do have a sort of a duty and responsibility to the men and women that you lead. And at some point in time, Zelensky has to say, what you're asking me to do is untenable. I can't sustain it. I can't accomplish it. We need to go over on the defensive. And you saw the split. Zelensky was saying, we're going to attack, attack, attack. Why does he have to say attack, attack, attack after the Ukrainians have suffered a humiliation with the failed counteroffensive? Because only by saying attack, attack, attack can he get the West to give him the munitions that makes him politically viable. This is no longer about achieving a result on the battlefield. This is about the retention of political viability by President Zelensky. It's purely a process designed to prop him up politically for survival purposes. He's willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers so that he can continue to be the president. Zelensky is starting to say that's not worth it anymore. We're not willing to die to keep you in political power. We need to go over on the defensive to retain as much military capacity as possible so that we can defend Ukraine against the Russians. Or if this war is going to end, at least save as many lives as we can. And so you see this split between the two. And Zelensky has used his popularity amongst the Ukrainian people to become a political threat, a potential political threat to Zelensky. And so, Zelensky knows in order to retain the charade of democracy that he has to have elections, but he doesn't want to hold elections that he knows he's going to lose. And I think Zelensky recognizes that if he were to run against Zelensky in an open, fair, and free election, that he wouldn't be the president of Ukraine. So in order to create the conditions where he would be reelected, he needs to keep Zelensky out of office. But at the end of the day, if you take a look, if you go back into April 1945, I keep bringing this up, look at the relationship between Himmler, the head of the SS, loyal ally of Adolf Hitler, and Hitler himself. It was deteriorating to the point where at the end, Himmler was seeking to negotiate with the Allies on his own without authority. Hitler ordered him arrested and killed. It didn't matter because the Red Army was taking Berlin. So all this garbage between Zelensky and Zelensky and all this doesn't matter because none of them matter because Russia's won this war and Russia will dictate an outcome that will guarantee that neither of those men are going to be in power when this thing is done. Their day is over. It's finished.
One of the areas that the Russian military-industrial complex has advanced a lot was the area of drones. New Lancet that it's called Product 53 and the new geranium. What's the importance of this area for Russians?
Well, I think drone warfare has revolutionized modern war. I don't think NATO, the United States, and others have quite figured out just how much the war has changed. Ukraine knows because Ukraine is on the receiving end, and Ukraine is using drones very effectively too. From top to bottom, drones are thoroughly integrated into every aspect of tactics, operations, strategy. The two drones you mentioned, the Geranium 2, it's been upgraded with a jet engine, quieter. It uses composite material. It's painted black, which means that it can be employed at nighttime, and it's being employed very effectively. The Lancet Project 56 is takes a very successful drone system, the Lancet, which has since the beginning of the war proven its worth. But they've increased the range. It now can operate at night as well as day. But here's the big thing: it operates as a swarm of drones. The Lancet no longer is a single piece of munition fired, controlled, and brought in individually. It can now be fired dozens at a time. That in a fire and forget mode, where they're fired into a region, they coordinate with each other, they share intelligence, they distinguish their own targets, and then they all go in and hit separate targets, saturating a battle space with this the capability. These are game-changing technologies to fight the new Geranium-2, which doesn't cost that much to produce. Ukraine is going to have to activate air defense radars, which are going to be detected by the Russians. They're going to have to fire air defense systems, and one Patriot missile or one Iris-T missile or one any modern system that the Ukrainians have cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars per copy, whereas the Geranium-2 is tens of thousands of dollars. So right off the bat, Russia is bleeding the Ukrainians dry from a fiscal standpoint and from a capability standpoint, forcing them to use assets against a cheaper system, which if they don't shoot down, will hit the target it's going after with devastating results. So they have to shoot it down. In doing so, they expose these systems to newer systems coming in that can destroy these and go in through the gap created to hit strategic targets. It changes warfare, absolutely changes warfare. But where it's really where it gets really interesting is what's being done at the tactical level. These quadcopters that they're using are not only collecting tactical intelligence, but they're being used to devastating effect to drop grenades, and more recently as what they call first-person kamikaze drones, FPV, first-person view, meaning that there's a camera on the front and the drone operator is guiding the drone into a bunker, onto a tank, onto artillery. And there are swarms of these drones operating throughout the theater, inflicting tremendous harm on the Ukrainians. They also use them to resupply. So as troops advance forward, they use drones to bring in ammunition resupply, to bring in food, to bring in medical supplies, to forces that are otherwise would have been exposed, isolated, and subjected to being defeated. It's revolutionized war. As units maneuver, they now have drone units that maneuver with them to use these drones as fire support. So drones are being incorporated into the formal fire support planning of a Russian attack or a Ukrainian attack. They defensively, they have to have anti-drone capabilities, these guns, these jammers that are being used. It's transformed the battlefield. And at this point in time, the Russian dominance is so absolute that the Ukrainians are paralyzed. They can't move lest they be detected and killed by drones. The Russians have so many drones now that they're using them against individual Ukrainian soldiers. It's a game-changing technology, and it's playing a big role in why Russia is winning this war, and it's I think exposing fatal weaknesses in the West because we aren't prepared to fight this kind of war yet.
The other area of tremendous impact is the electronic warfare. Is Russia winning in this battle between the West, between NATO and Russia?
Well, first of all, we have to recognize this is one of the more sensitive areas, very classified. The Russians don't like to talk about it too much, so you can't claim to have absolute knowledge. What we know is a couple things. One, that the Ukrainians have acknowledged that the Russians are dominating the electronic warfare aspects of this conflict. They are preventing the Ukrainians from communicating effectively. That's a major thing, jamming. But they're also all the technology that we've given Ukraine, the HIMARS, the ATACMS, the JDAM satellite guided bombs, um, the Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles from Germany and England. They're all being jammed very effectively by the Russians. The Ukrainians can't employ JDAM bombs anymore because the Russians just jam the signal and the bomb goes stupid. The majority of HIMARS are likewise jammed and made stupid by Russian electronic warfare. Even in the sphere of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, where NATO and the United States have been providing, um, very effective support to the Ukrainians. One of the reasons why the Ukrainians have achieved what they have on the battlefield is because of this intelligence support provided real time to Ukrainian units that can deliver artillery or deliver drones or deliver other supporting fires. Um, you know, but Russia, isn't sitting there just saying, okay, well, it is what it is. Strategically, I think there was a European satellite that was put up over Crimea. There's a lot of cloud cover in Crimea and indeed in eastern Ukraine, and conventional imaging satellites are not as effective because they can't see through clouds. Radar imaging can see through clouds, and the status of radar imaging today in terms of quality is such that it can discern items. I think that I'm not going to say what the number is, but there's a classified number of what the resolution is, and it's pretty good. And so radar imaging has certain effectiveness, and the United States is not prone to share its radar imaging technology with the West. I remember during the Gulf War, that product was not shareable with even our closest allies. So I imagine that a similar block on trading that or sharing that intelligence exists. So Europe created its own imaging satellite, radar imaging satellite. And yet when they took an image of Crimea, entire swaths of Crimea were blacked out. I couldn't see through it. Remember, this is radar, it's not clouds. Why couldn't they? Because Russia knew the frequency of the radar and had jammed that area that was sensitive. They didn't want the radar imagers to look into. They had jammed that frequency and made it impossible to read that strip. On the battlefield, Russia deploys forward because of the Ukrainian drones. Russia deploys forward and puts up a literal umbrella of electronic warfare defenses that jam radar imaging, jam the signals of the drones, basically to create this protective umbrella, sort of a digital Iron Dome, so to speak, over these units. Russia does this better than anybody else. It's all based upon the innovations that have occurred since this war started. So yeah, Russia is dominating in the field of electronic warfare, and I think any American or NATO general would be shocked by how effective Russia is at this and how poorly NATO and American forces can operate in this environment.
How do you see the experience that the Russian army has gained during this battle? Do we have any other army right now, any other country that has such experience?
No, there is no army on the face of the earth that has this experience. The Ukrainian army, of course, has experience, but they're all dead. The people that are fighting today are people who get no training. They don't know how to use the equipment. So even though they're involved in the same battles, you can't compare the two. The Russians, their experiences cuts across the board. When they started, they were dealing with a primarily contract-based military of soldiers who had never seen combat. So a lot of mistakes were made early on. That's just natural. It is what it is. The Russians then mobilized 300,000 reservists. And here's the great victory of this, because the mobilization system was fundamentally broken in Russia. They were in for a rude shock when they sought to mobilize these guys. A lot of corruption they uncovered, a lot of inefficiencies, etc. Some regions performed well, others less well, some didn't perform at all. but Russia learned from this, fixed the problem, and today, in addition to having trained those 300,000, the same system today is absorbing hundreds of thousands of volunteers and training them to a high degree of capability. And all of this training incorporates lessons learned from the special military operation. And so the soldiers that are coming out of the training pipeline have a rough familiarity with what's expected of them in this new environment. It's not like they were trained in the old way, so they have to learn all the mistakes. They've been educated on the right tactics and operational procedures, etc. And there's hundreds of thousands of them who have real world combat experience. Remember, they're fighting against a Ukrainian army that is far more deadly than anything NATO has. Ukraine uses far more artillery than its NATO counterparts. Artillery is the number one killer on the battlefield. Russia knows how to survive in an artillery intensive environment. So if they ever are called upon to face NATO, Russia will, understand what the potential threat is and how to deal with it. And NATO lacks the resources to survive in this. We don't have the ammunition. We don't have the tubes. We don't have enough. The Russian military today, a key aspect of any military is logistics, how to sustain itself. Russia today is sustaining hundreds of thousands of troops in a full-time combat posture, logistically, with the ammunition they need, with the food they need, with the fuel they need. Russia's perfected this logistical sustainment. The West can't do anything remotely near this. I don't know how we think if we ever had to fight a war on this scope and scale, we'd be able to logistically support it. We haven't exercised it for some time now. We lack the resources to make this work. It works in peacetime because you can plan and exercise well in advance and pre-stage equipment, and everything's scripted. There ain't no script in war. It's happening. The enemy gets a vote, and if you don't have it, you don't have it. And to get it to you when the enemy's interdicting you, so the West can't sustain this kind of fight logistically, which is the end of their maneuver force. Because if you don't have fuel, if you don't have ammunition, it's over. It's done. So Russia is by far the most combat experienced military in terms of relevant experience related to large-scale ground combat in Europe, in the world. And their troops are, veterans. They have experience that's relevant. The leadership is very sound. Every military in peacetime, and sadly, this speaks to the American military as well, even the Marine Corps. We promote, peacetime warriors, guys who never, look good in peacetime. They're good at putting Marines on parade. They're good at ensuring that Toys for Tots is adequately executed. They're good at doing any number of peacetime tasks, even those with combat experience. What was their combat experience? Iraq, Afghanistan. I mean, yeah, it was intense for the guys there, but it wasn't anything remotely related to what's going on in Europe today. So, we have a lot of leaders in the American military that if they were subjected to the kind of stresses and strain that large-scale ground combat presents, would fail. Russia had similar leaders. Vladimir Putin has talked about it. He said, yeah, we went to war with some guys, both on the ground and in staff, who were perfumed princesses, people who were there for the wrong reasons. They weren't there to be warriors dedicated to waging war. And the system had to weed them out. Russia's been purged of inefficiencies. The officers they have survived the crucible of combat. These are very well, it's like comparing the U.S. Army of 1945 with the U.S. Army of 1942. Rick Atkinson wrote a wonderful trilogy, and you read An Army at Dawn, the first book about, the U.S. Army going into North Africa. And you compare the absolute inefficiency of that, and then you read Day of Battle about the final, the end game stage of that conflict in Europe, and you look at how professional, how efficient, how murderously efficient the U.S. military had become, and that took 3 years to do. The Russian military has gone through this. Today, they are a murderously efficient military. They have perfected the art of not just killing, but survival. And you combine those two, and you have something that is invincible when going up against a military that has no relevant combat experience. And all of NATO, including the United States, fits that definition.
When it comes to the conflict in Gaza and the war in Ukraine, the special military operation, how do you see the contrast? Anything in the war in Ukraine that the Israelis could have learned before going in Gaza?
Ukraine is large-scale ground combat, a different kind of war, but there are some lessons. And I come at this question from this perspective. There are Russian officers who have been involved in this in the conflict from the get-go, in the conflict in Ukraine. They were involved in Mariupol, which was urban warfare. And they have taken a look at the Israeli tactics, and they've said, you guys would get slaughtered if you fought the Ukrainians. The Israeli Defense Force would be slaughtered. They'd lose everybody because their tactics are just stupid in terms of large-scale ground combat. But the Israelis aren't fighting a conventional military force. They're fighting an unconventional military force. But, you know, their tactics are stupid, not because they're the wrong tactics, they are, but because they're being executed by a military not trained properly to execute them. The IDF is very sloppy. The concept of security is non-existent. Hamas is able to pop up, destroy tanks, kill Israeli soldiers. Armor is going forward unsupported by infantry because the infantry is scared. The Israelis are not a very good military. They're competent to a degree against an enemy like Hamas. But if they fight Hezbollah, and again, an expansion of this conflict that draws in Hezbollah will outclass them every way. Hezbollah has been preparing for this war. Israel's not ready for this war. Their troops are not motivated. There will be slaughtered if they go to war against Hezbollah. The only thing Israel has is an air force. Let's put it this way. If you took the Israeli air force out of the equation in Gaza, Hamas would kill every single Israeli soldier there. That's the truth, because the Israelis just aren't that good.
Is the Netanyahu administration looking for capturing Gaza in totality?
The humanitarian pause was a defeat for Netanyahu. Remember, the Netanyahu government said there will be no ceasefire, and they aren't going to trade, exchange prisoners for hostages, that they're there to defeat Hamas, defeat them politically, militarily, and they were unable to do that. And the implementation of the Dahiyat doctrine, this collective punishment, and you combine that with, again, we have to deal with another reality here. What Israel knew about Hamas in Gaza is no longer at play. Hamas, when they attacked on October 7th, captured the computer servers containing the Israeli intelligence about their assets inside Gaza. So Israel went blind in terms of human resources. They attacked the Unit A200 signals intelligence platforms. Israel went blind in terms of intercepting communications. So what Israel thought they knew about Gaza changed overnight. When they went in on October 7th, 8th, 9th, and thereafter, they're going in blind. They have to start all over. And how does Israel do this? Through an over-reliance of artificial intelligence. They have a targeting algorithm that they've developed where they've linked each house in Gaza to a specific outcome for Hamas. It doesn't mean that they're going to achieve it, but if you hit this house, this is what it does to Hamas. And they also know that this is how many civilian casualties will be accrued. So there is no, this is collateral damage. We had no idea so many people would die. This is deliberate murder based upon target. It's called the gospel. I think the Jewish term is hasbara or something of that nature. That's in play today. This is mass murder, genocide by the Israeli government against the Palestinian people. And it failed. And so it failed on a number of fronts. It failed in regards to Hamas, but because it failed so egregiously, the Netanyahu government was under pressure from a domestic audience saying, hey, you're not succeeding. We need our relatives freed. We need the hostages released. The entire world reacted to this collective punishment, this indiscriminate bombing with horror. Millions of people in the streets. The United States State Department, filed a memorandum, internal memorandum, a dissent memorandum, saying the policies of the Biden administration are destroying the credibility and viability of America abroad. And so we started putting pressure. So Netanyahu had to agree to a ceasefire. He didn't want to. This was a political disaster for him. And so he was looking for any excuse to get out of the ceasefire. He found it. They're now back at war. He can't afford to have a second ceasefire. That would be the end of him politically. But he's failing militarily. As we speak, the Netanyahu government is being, the IDF, I mean, is being defeated in certain areas of Gaza. They've had to retreat from certain areas in Gaza because of the casualties they've taken. This is hugely demoralizing for their military. So Netanyahu is in his government are in a very dire straits in terms of their domestic political reality. There's nothing they can do to change the fact that Netanyahu's political days are over. He is the problem, not the solution. He will be removed from power, either from pressure from the United States or pressure from domestic or both. But we need to stop talking about what Israel wants right now. Israel doesn't want anything. Netanyahu wants everything. He needs to be removed and a new, more legitimate Israeli government in place that speaks on behalf of the majority of the Israeli population, then can speak about what they want. They may not change their policies. Who knows? But I think, real politic will set in, and the Israelis are going to have to make adjustments. Economically, they cannot sustain this fight indefinitely. With hundreds of thousands of reservists in our space, getting in our head, making operations in the region more complicated, more difficult. But Iran's not going to attack the United States. They're not going to start the fight first. They're putting that ship out there as sort of a deterrence to say, here we are. The Iranians may screen the Houthi, compelling the United States to either, ignore what the Houthi are doing or sink an Iranian ship, thereby generating the excuse for a broader war with Iran, which the United States doesn't want. And why don't we want it? Because we can't win. Sinking an Iranian ship is not a victory, because we'll sink that ship, then Iran will destroy our bases in the region, maybe sink other American ships. That's not the fight we want. And then once it's started, how do we finish it? We don't have sufficient forces to finish the job, so it would become one of these perpetual conflicts, which we never win. I mean, yeah, we can take a submarine. The USS Florida is floating off the area, 124 cruise missiles, and we can cycle those cruise missiles through a target list, and then when we're done, that's 124 targets we hit, and so what? The Iranians have been preparing for this years. There's nothing we're going to do to the Iranians that will take them by surprise. So, and then we're stuck with a never-ending conflict, and as history has showed, we always end up quitting because we don't have staying power, and that's the last thing we want or need at this point in time. So the Iranian ship isn't a threat in terms of it, able to directly threaten Americans, but it's definitely a hindrance.
All right, we have a voicemail message from a woman who has a theory about the Netanyahu, and she wants to get your take on this theory.
Hi, Scott. I have a theory, and I'd like to know your opinion. Netanyahu is on thin ice, of course, but now he's really sunken through the ice now that judicial reform has not passed. At the same time, the IDF has publicly announced that they're taking troops out of Gaza, more than just the Golani Brigade, a substantial amount of troops. I'm wondering, of course they took the troops out because they were getting their ass kicked. But do you think it was also because the war cabinet wants to put them on the border of Lebanon and focus on the Lebanese front, since they now killed a major Hamas leader in Beirut, and Hezbollah has since 2006 said that if Israel ever attacks Beirut, they will attack Tel Aviv. As you've mentioned many times, Hezbollah is no joke. So it'd be pretty crazy for the Israelis to, take on that bluff. But do you think because Netanyahu is now really screwed because of the judicial reform thing not passing, that this is his last Hail Mary to be sort of the dictator in power? Do you think he actually wants Hezbollah to attack Tel Aviv?
The short answer is yes, he does, because it's his only look. Netanyahu doesn't care about Israel. We need to be clear about that. He cares about Netanyahu. If he cared about Israel, he would have withdrawn from the political stage a long time ago. Nobody who could claim to care about Israel would have formed the government that he has formed, this far right-wing government that has dug Israel into a hole internationally. His judicial reforms, the reforms of basic law, were designed to allow his political wing to take control of the judiciary, to block any effort by the judiciary to follow through on his indictments on corruption charges, that if he went to trial and was found guilty, would put him in jail for life. He's a very corrupt man, or innocent until proven guilty. So he's been alleged to have been a very corrupt man, a very naughty boy. And, right now, if he's going to be thrown out. He's one of the most unpopular prime ministers out there. The only thing that keeps him in is this war. And if he starts withdrawing troops from Gaza, that's implying that the war is moving in a different phase, one that doesn't necessitate the kind of emergency powers and emergency governance that Netanyahu has assumed since October 7th. So he needs a new war, an expanded war, and that war will be with Hezbollah, and then hopefully with Iran if the United States can be brought in. So this is what he's hoping. He's hoping that he can redeem himself through fire, redeem himself through conflict, through war. And he's looking for a broader conflict. I'm hoping that his war cabinet will tell him no, because the reality is, if you think that the Hamas whipped up on the IDF in Gaza, you ain't seen nothing yet. If Hezbollah ever unleashes the full weight of its military capability, they will kick at Israel's ass from sundown to sunset.
All right. The next question is from Charles Whitaker in Singapore. What do you make of the reports by the Hindustan Times that Hamas is using Chinese weapons and that an Iranian drone attacked an Indian ship?
Well, I mean, a report is a report. I don't have any independent way to confirm what the Hindustan Times has reported. If they have evidence that Hamas is using Chinese weapons, why not? Hamas, will acquire weapons on the global market directly or indirectly. So it's possible. There's nothing suspicious about it. China sells weapons on the global market. There are middlemen out there who sell. Hamas is using American weapons. Hamas is using Russian-made weapons, North Korean-made weapons. Hamas will use whatever weapons they can get their hands on. So it doesn't, it doesn't shock me that those weapons are there. About the drone attack, again, something happened. There's stories that it was an Iranian drone. It makes no sense, but if there's evidence to back that up, then so be it. Put the evidence on the table. But there's literally no reason for Iran to be attacking an Indian ship in the Indian Ocean. There's no justification for it, and it just doesn't matter. Iran doesn't go out of its way to create unnecessary provocations. Not at a time when they're trying to manage the escalation of the conflict between Israel and Gaza, and Israel and Hezbollah. They don't need to go out and confuse things even more. But again, Hindustan Times is a newspaper. They have sources. If they're going to make that claim, maybe they should put some evidence on the table to back it up.
All right. We're getting comments from Twitter. We'll make sure we get a couple of those inserted. This is the first time, or X, I mean, this is the first time we've been able to insert them directly. That is a good thing. The next question comes from, hold on, let me do it. Sorry about that. Mohammed Saleh in London. How is the assassination of the Hamas leader in Beirut going to affect the war effort against the occupation forces? Sometimes you've already kind of answered these questions. That's because you don't see these questions in advance, so it's a little bit redundant, but you want to take another shot at this one?
Certainly. Look, one of the big things that was happening that could lead to potential de-escalation was that Hamas had been talking with the Qataris and the Egyptians about the release of hostages and about bringing humanitarian goods in. And what the assassination has done is that Hamas has stopped talking with everybody. They've just pulled back and said there is no talk going on right now. That means that the Israeli hostages that are in Gaza will continue to suffer, continue to be prisoner. It also means that there won't be a ceasefire, that the go on. This is what Israel wanted. See, Israel was looking at progress being made. Hamas was being reasonable. Hamas was saying, we killed was actually somebody that the Egyptians don't have high regard for the mainstream Hamas leadership, but the guy they killed in Beirut, the Egyptians could talk to. They were talking, through Hamas, talking to Hamas through him, through his offices. This was a guy that was held in high regard. He would meet with the king of Jordan. He would meet with other Arab leaders. This was the kind of guy that if you want to deal with Hamas, you want to be in Hamas. This is why Israel killed him, because they don't want people dealing with Hamas. So it's shut down lines of communication. There's no talk going on right now. And what it's done is it's guaranteed an extension of the conflict, which gives Israel continued carte blanche to slaughter Palestinian civilians.
Here's a voicemail message from a gentleman named Hazir.
Hello, Scott. Hope you're doing well. This question comes from a Kurd from Iran regarding the reshaping of the world order within the next 25 years. Given the waning power of the United States due to its relentless overstretch and hegemony. Are we going to witness a new superpower seizing the throne from the United States, namely China, within the next 25 years? Or is it going to be check and balance between the superpowers, like China in cahoot with Russia and EU with the United States, sort of like a Cold War? And we people in this region falling victim as pawns on a chessboard?
Well, it's a good question. I think the answer is in the intent of, because the United States is clearly on the decline. First of all, guys, when I say it's on the decline, that doesn't mean that we've collapsed tomorrow. We're still a superpower. We're still one of the greatest powers in the world today, but we are seeing the limits of this power, and we're also realizing that many of the things that combine together to make America the power that it is, our economy, our military, our political system, are suffering, going through difficulties. And so, collectively, they represent, a weakening America. And in the vacuum that's created, it's being filled by others. Look, if China wanted to be a global superpower like the United States, then it could probably position itself to fill that down the road. Fortunately, China has no desire to become the new America. Neither does Russia. Both China and Russia instead are looking for a multipolar world. This is where institutions like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or BRICS become very important. It's very difficult to speak of Iran or Saudi Arabia or Egypt becoming pawns in a new superpower race when they have joined BRICS. And Russia and China will be expanding BRICS to bring in even more pawns, potential pawns. Why? Because Russia doesn't want to play that game. China doesn't want to play that game. They want to deal with a multipolar world that is a law-based international order, not a rules-based international order. And that's the direction that we're drifting to right now. And so I'm rather optimistic that in the next 25 years, you're going to see nations like Iran, nations like Saudi Arabia, nations like Egypt able to project themselves onto the international stage in a manner that reflects their sovereignty, meaning that they will do what they want to do, as opposed to being pawns of a larger game being played by global superpowers.
All right, let's take a question coming in live on Twitter, or on X. I got to get in the habit of saying X. Sophoros on X. Did the U.S. know about the domestic Iran attack? Because a day or two, they pulled back the aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean, maybe to prevent any missile attack.
Yeah, look, but the aircraft carrier that was pulled back was the USS Gerald Ford that was in the Mediterranean. I believe that Dwight D. Eisenhower is still operating in the Red Sea region, although it's been pulled back away from the Yemeni coast. And I think the third carrier, which is operating in the Pacific in the vicinity of Singapore, it might be the Carl Vinson, I don't know, hasn't been brought into the region. But the Dwight D. Eisenhower was in the Persian Gulf a couple of weeks ago, and they pulled that out because they realized how vulnerable it was to Iranian attack if there was this escalation. So they got it the hell out of the Persian Gulf, because if things went south real quick, that's a major asset that would be lost. But it's late and I'm tired. Could you throw that question up one more time? Because my brain drifted.
Sure. Now we have another internet freeze, I think. First a brain freeze, then an internet freeze.
There.
Move around or something.
But